Hey y'all, so I just finished my morning workout right here in my backyard, and before I go inside and shower and start the day, I wanted to take a quick second to have a little story time, because I watched a video from a YouTuber whose content I really enjoy and admire. Brielle Writes. She is a writer and author, and also a development editor for books, and she talks about her process of writing her debut novel, which to me kind of feels like kindred spirits while I am documenting trying to make my first feature as a writer-director. But she had a video that was a little bit different the other day that talked about how she was starting over in her late 20s. I'm going to just real quick take down my headband because the 5 head I have going here is like bouncing light like crazy, and I would like to be a little bit more I don't know, less reflective, which is difficult when you're this pale. But anywho, so she had this video about starting over in her late 20s, and it got me thinking about, I just related to it so hard because I started over in my 20s and my 30s, and I honestly feel like the part of adulthood we don't talk about is how much we're starting over and learning and still coming of age, even when we're supposed to have it all figured out. And that's, honestly, that's what I write about a lot. That is the thing that fuels my romantic comedies and the buddy comedies and everything that I write, is this idea that we're all supposed to have it figured out, or we're sold the idea that we're supposed to have it figured out when we're adults, and then we don't. And then we have to figure out life again. And usually it's helpful to have friends, family, lovers, people in your life who can show you who you are and who you want to be. And so that's why I love writing about relationships, whether it's friendships or romances, or my debut feature as a writer is about a father-son relationship, so parental familial relationships. So anyway, I want to talk about the first time I had to start over as an adult, really start over. And it's because I made a mistake. So I did my undergrad at USC. I have a degree in critical studies from the School of Cinematic Arts. I think it's now called Cinema and Media Studies. But it's basically film history and criticism. And if you don't know what that is, it's like an English degree, but instead of reading books, you're watching movies, which is pretty cool. I've always, since the time I was 7, known I wanted to be a writer and director, but it's been a long journey getting back there. And part of that journey was that at USC, I had a series of terrible internships. Stuff like I had to make copies on a Xerox machine because I feel like I'm ancient right now telling this story, but I had to get copies on a Xerox machine and of scripts. And I was told specifically I was not allowed to read them. This was at an agency where these scripts were client scripts. I wasn't allowed to read them. I got in trouble for it. And then I had some internships where I was going to start. I was going to have one on the Warner Brothers lot, and the day before I started, I got a call from a really apologetic assistant who said, "Yeah, our boss's nephew said he might want to try this whole film thing, and we only have room for one intern, so sorry, you don't have an internship." And I had one really great internship, but stuff like this, these little inconveniences kept happening, and I had this voice in the back of my head, some very wise advice that I had gotten, which is, if you can do anything else in the world, do it. Because this is a grueling, unforgiving career. And I thought, I maybe want to do something else because I don't want to deal with the nepotism and the unreasonableness and working for peanuts and not getting anywhere and not having my opinions heard. And even at the good internship, I had to read a script that was awful and then tell the person, because they were friends with the producer who owned the company, that it was amazing. And I just thought, this is dishonest and I don't like it. So I decided to pivot and go to law school because my dad was a lawyer and he loved his job. He's retired now. And I knew it had a lot to do with writing and reading and analysis, and I loved all those things. So I took a couple law courses in undergrad just to make sure that I was, interested, and theoretically loved it. I took the LSAT and got a pretty great score and got into a really great law school. I went to Northwestern. I made amazing friends. I had a great time socially. I felt like I fit in a way that I sometimes didn't feel like I fit in at film school. While I was in law school, I was not really paying attention as much as I should have. I was doodling in the margins of my PowerPoints. I was outlining stories in the margins of my PowerPoints. I literally couldn't stop. Legal writing, I got terrible grades in. The only thing I was really good at was writing the statements of facts, which were the story of the case. What happened, why we should care, and the perspective that we needed to look at the case through in order to argue the correct side. Well, the correct side meaning the side that I was on. Not that I was correct all the time. But all of this combined, it was just, I was so in love with story that even in law school, where analysis and law and reasoning were key, I was looking to build narratives as any place I could. And socially, I was thriving. I had great friends, except at parties, a lot of the times, we get a few beers in and everyone would be debating case law, talking about different things that we'd read that week. And honestly, I just wanted to talk about stories. America's Next Top Model, or I love No Country for Old Men, and that had come out pretty recently, like before I was in law school. And I wanted to talk about the films and the TV shows that were fun and inspiring and made me feel like there was a second coming of neoclassicism, because again, I went to USC and studied film and theory and criticism, and so I'm a huge history nerd. My friends, as great as they were not like in touch with that. I tried to host an Oscars party and nobody came, which is really sad, honestly. And then in the middle of all of this, as I was grappling with whether to move back to Los Angeles, because I moved to Chicago, and I was in a fairly serious relationship, and my boyfriend was very content being in Chicago. He was in dental school. And if you listen to How to Fall in Love the Hard Way, my audio romantic comedy series, Jack, the character of Jack is based on him. It's a fairly unflattering portrait, but that's a story for another day. But anyway, as I was explaining to him, like, I don't know if I'm happy here. I don't know if law's for me. I'm missing film. And then going into second year, into 2L, the only job offers I even seemed close to getting from on-campus interviewing, because my grades were not great. I was in the bottom third of the class, which, I mean, my classmates went on to, like, clerk for Supreme Court justices and run the ACLU, and, like, so, I mean, it's not like I was in the bottom third next to slouches, but this wasn't hitting for me. As I told my boyfriend at the time, maybe I want to move back to LA, and he said, I'd never move back to LA. I'd never move to LA with you, which I thought was completely unfair because I moved to Chicago for him. I didn't apply to schools outside of Chicago for law school. I came to be with him to see if we could build a life together, and he was telling me that he was unwilling to make any sacrifices for me because he could be a dentist anywhere. I couldn't be a filmmaker anywhere. It's just that simple. Realizing that my relationship was probably coming to an end, because even if I decided to stay in Chicago, I didn't want to stay with someone who wasn't willing to be the partner for me that I was willing to be for them. And so I went to the Dean of Happiness, because Northwestern had a Dean of Happiness. And Professor Lupo, if you're somehow reading this, hello, I love you. You helped change my life. So I went to him and I told him, listen, law isn't for me. I'm not happy. And I knew he'd get it. And he did, because he was an attorney at a very large firm, being very successful. And he burnt out so hard that he took a year off trying to write a novel and then just ended up kind of puttering around not writing because he was so exhausted and unhappy. And he came to Northwestern to change that, to make sure that law students and lawyers were happy and enjoyed their work. So I told him I wasn't happy, and we designed a plan. I was going to take a ton of classes at the beginning of 3L, because this was towards the end of 2L, make sure that all of my requirements were settled. Then, second semester of 3L, I was moving to LA, and I was going to be writing my doctoral thesis, which was going to be on the Hollywood production code and how it became a de facto bureaucracy for the United States, because, fun fact, the United States is the only country in the world whose film censorship board is not tied to the government. So as much as bad as you want to say about the Hays Code, it actually saved us a lot of heartache and grief and really messy integration between the film industry and the government. I mean, the MPAA has its own problems, but I think that the MPAA is the lesser of two evils, to be frank. I chose that topic specifically not just because I'm a film nerd, but because I had to move to LA to do the research. Because I went to the Academy Library and I looked through the files from the Hays Code. That's something that you cannot physically get anywhere else. And so with that plan in mind, I went to my boyfriend's apartment downstairs from mine, because that was the much as he was willing to move. And I told him, this isn't working. I'm moving to LA. If you don't want to move with me, then we're over. And he said, fine, then we're over. And then over the next 6 months, he tried to get back together with me 7 times. And so I came to Los Angeles, and I wrote my doctoral thesis. I had a series of great internships at a management company and at a production company on the Disney lot. And I committed myself to writing. And it's taken a lot of different forms. I wrote novels at first. And then when I got all of my rejections saying, like, you have such a cinematic voice, I realized, well, screenplays. And then I started writing horror and realized that all of my horror was too funny. And I pivoted to comedy. And I mean, this is a flattening and a simplification of a lot of years of work and trial and error and everything. But this all started because I started over at 25. I pivoted out of a whole career path that I ultimately didn't want. I ended a relationship that had been nearly a quarter of my life, or maybe even more than a quarter of my life, if I'm doing the math right. And just said, this is what I want. This is who I am. And I need to thrive on my own and on my own terms. And I mean, I'm just so grateful I did that. And the thing is that this story where, like, I come to LA at 25 and start over, that's not the end of my story, because then at 32, I had another huge pivot and another way that I started over my life. And then at 36, the same thing. And I keep learning and growing and changing. And going back to Brielle's video where she is so, like, excited, scared, nervous, this energy, that to me is where living happens. Because if you're not changing and growing, then are you really living? And that question is the question that all of my work comes from. And I know I've shared a couple things about True After Dark in the past weeks, and that's the script that's really taking over me. And that is honestly reinvention. And for True Shapiro, my main character, she's reinventing herself at 36. She had a life that she had been planning since she was 18. So literally half her life. And it all falls apart in one evening. And then she has to figure out who she is again and what she actually wants now as a 36-year-old, not as the girl she was when she was 18. The story's about her finding herself. And all of my stories are about people finding themselves as adults. So yeah, that's it. Brielle's video really inspired me, made me think, and made me excited to share my story with you all about reinventing myself at 25. And maybe someday I'll do the 32, the 36, the 39 versions. And in the future, maybe the 45-year-old version, but I don't even know who she's going to be yet. All right, thank you all so much for watching. I'm going to get inside and shower. And let me know in the comments how you've reinvented yourself over the years. I'd love to hear who you were before and after. Or if you want to do a longer story time, tag me in it. Love to hear it. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.